Dumela, Sobona, Sakpase, Namaste, Upshin, Dubra Ota, Assalamu alaikum, Hotep, Buenas noches, bonsoir, greetings. Welcome everyone to the Lott, Carey, Women in Service Everywhere, the Digital Couch. Welcome to episode 13. We are so blessed. We are honored to have you here with us on the digital couch. Let me begin before I do anything. Let me give honor and praise to those people who have said that this conversation is important. This conversation is worthy of conversation. And that would be the Lott Carey leadership, the Executive Secretary Treasurer, Reverend Emmett Dunn, our President, the Reverend Dr. Gina Stewart, the First Vice President, Dr. Jesse Williams, and the Second Vice President, Dr. James Victor. And of Women in Service Everywhere, we have at our leadership the Reverend Dr. Angelita Clifton, who is our President, the Reverend Dr. Brenda McBurrow, who is the First Vice President, and Sister Lynette Richardson, who is the Second Vice President. We thank you for the service that you've given and the opportunity to engage in this conversation. I want to begin, before we go any further, to say that this conversation is extremely delicate. There will be a lot of triggers. And so those of you who have paid attention to the prompts that I've given prior to this conversation, I want that to be your cautious warning that the conversation is very difficult. And so if at any time you feel that enough is enough, we totally understand. But we wanted to broach this conversation about some people who we may not necessarily want in our church. At some point, we have to have a conversation about, can they sit in our pews? And so on that note, if you are intending to share this, please share it again and say that it's sensitive information. But welcome to the Digital Couch. My name is Dorilla Inez Larrier, the host. Tonight, we are going to engage in a conversation, as we have for the past few months, about creating sacred spaces. We've talked about different people who should be given, the voice should be given to them, that they should have a platform, that they should share in position, that we should give them a pat on the back. But there's a group of people who, some people are like, no. Tonight, I want to welcome to our digital couch, the Reverend Dr. excuse me. Sorry. The Reverend Dr. Valerie Pyles.
Grace and peace to all. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you so much for the invitation, Ms. Larry.
Good evening. Good evening, Dr. Pyles. So I thank you so much for being on our couch this evening. And thank you all. You know that this is Thursdays in Black. And so, of course, my guest, Dr. Pyles, is donned in her Black. We are recognizing and we are acknowledging that with donning Black on Thursdays, and also pearls if they work for you, that we stand united with women and men across the world to say that gender-based violence needs to stop. We are saying no together. Together we are stronger. The conversation this evening has to do with sacred spaces, which is our theme. And let me also just say that this is episode 13. That means we literally have finished an entire year. And this, in essence, is the beginning of year number 2. Who can sit in the pews with us? When we first started thinking about having this conversation about creating a sacred space for people who have offended, my first reaction, and so now I have to be in the actual character I was, went like this. Are you kidding me? No. No. huh? What? Then I had to take a step back and I said, why would we even consider having people who have offended come into the church? And so that's where Dr. Valerie Pyles comes in. She helped calm me down, but I've had this conversation with a couple of people to try to get ready for this conversation. And literally, stitches were ripped out, band-aids were pulled off, and wounds were opened. So we invited Dr. Pyles onto the couch tonight in order to help us with this conversation, not just for individuals, but for ministries, for churches. What should be done? Who needs to know? Who gets to know? What's the conversation before they cross our doorstep? Where do they sit? And what kind of plan should be in place if there is a plan to be in place? Is your church ready? Dr. Pyles.
Well, I want to say that they're already sitting amongst you. And I want to be specific of what offenders we're speaking of. We're talking about sex offenders tonight. And I believe that there's at least 1 out of every 5 person that's in your company on a daily basis who has sexually offended. Sex offenders come in all types and shapes and colors. They could be male, female. They could be young people, older people, your youth. They could be your doctor, your teacher, your lawyer, one of your most trusted confidants. And it's to offend could be, as we're familiar with, the peeping Tom. It could be somebody who supposedly rubs up against you accidentally. It could be somebody who flashes, which is very obvious. They're flashing, they're exposing themselves, sitting next to you and, saying obscene things to you, either on the phone or right next to you. So you are already in the midst of those who have sexually offended. And we're careful about calling them sex offenders. So I want to say sexually offended. So you, as I said, you are already sitting amongst them. You just don't know it.
So for those of you who may have considered that an offender, or the term that I am learning is those who have offended or those who offend, sometimes we may think it's just a person that has exhibited or demonstrated a very specific act or action upon another. Mm-hmm. And for you to even expand the definition clinically, then it really widens, the options. And so I thank you first for doing that, because initially, and maybe for people who are listening, and those of you who know, who come to the digital couch conversations, we want you to do a couple of things. Number one, of course, definitely take notes. I have an excellent article to share with everyone at the end of this broadcast that, like, there's a list of protocols, there's a list of questions, there's a list of how to sort of address those who need to know in the congregation or in your space. But then there are also, like, pre, during, and after that person makes contact, there's just an amazing 1-sheet or 2-sheet. So we want to definitely share that with you. But we also want you to share this information to invite other people if they do run some form of a ministry, or they do have some form of either counseling or therapeutic or connection with, let's just say, therapeutic spaces or transitioning spaces. I think that's the best word. But the last thing is, we want you to drop comments. Now, of course, this is a respectful place. This is being broadcast on YouTube and in some spaces on Facebook, and this will be shared with a lot of people. Drop questions that we can actually pose to Dr. Pyles, because this is her work. And so Dr. Pyles definitely want you to share that which you can about your work in this space, so that we know you are the go-to person, and how you are also specifically trying to connect ministries here and abroad on how to make space for them when it is appropriate. Okay. So thank you. So Dr. Pyles, how did you get into this work? That which you can share. What do you do? How do you support? How do you support individuals, groups, transitioning persons, and then ministries?
I got into this work as a substitute teacher who had actually been downsized from the telephone company years ago. And through substitute teaching, I often noticed that the youth were going in and out of the guidance counselor's office with concerns. And I thought, how can I be more effective than what I'm doing right now? So I thought I wanted to be a guidance
Sorry.
counselor. And then from there, I ended up going to school instead to be a social worker. So, with that, I had an opportunity to work for an organization where I worked with juveniles who were sexually offending or had inappropriate behaviors along those lines. So, when asked about if I wanted to work with the male adults, the first thought was not really. I never thought I wanted to do that. But then, after seeing that a lot of my youth were males, I now look at the guys that I do work with, the male adult sex offenders, as just the big boys who have struggled and never had an opportunity. So that's how the whole thing got started. And I would say you have to be called to this. It's not for everybody. In fact, a lot of people, when I say what I do, they're like, "Wow, how do you manage?" But I actually can say from the bottom of my heart that I actually love these guys because I see them as people and not offenders. I see them as people who have made the wrong turns in life, who've had problems of their own, not that their problems should cause them or give them an excuse to offend. But 9 times out of 10, these guys have been sexually offended themselves as little boys, and they have been physically assaulted as little boys. So a lot of that comes from anger, where they've been, low self-esteem. I find that the pedophiles, those who offend children, relate better to children because they have not been able to be comfortable enough with their own peers, the adults. So it goes two ways. You have the pedophiles, and then you have what's called the rapists, those who work with or offend adults.
So thank you for sharing that, your path. I again, we those people who are just coming on in, we always have a pre-chat in order to get ready for this type of a conversation. And what started out as let's just check in for 10 or 15 minutes, I think it was like an hour and a half later, we were still trying to. Let me just say, I was trying to work through this. When you said 1 in 5, I I was very befuddled. I was very taken aback. But then when you expanded again the definition, I was like, wow, I didn't consider this. I didn't consider that. I didn't consider these, what some may call microaggressions, or
Mm-hmm.
demonstrations of, I don't know, thoughts, feelings, activity that would be considered as part of this behavior.
An offense, yes.
Thank you. Of an offense. So you did make some, or we did have some conversation about those people who, or those persons who disclose and those who don't. So because you've expanded the identification, or the definition, that's the best word, the definition, there are some people who offend, but they have not been identified, like convicted. And then there
Right.
are those who have been convicted, have, now we're talking about served or are serving, and
Serve their
now,
time.
right, serve their time, and now they're trying to find a place of restoration, find a place of spiritual rehabilitation, spiritual reconnection. So tell us about the process of, if the person is serving their time, going through legal treatment or legal enforcement, law enforcement process, and then they're released. What does that look like in terms of them seeking to come into the church?
Okay. The guys that I work with have served their time through the penal system, and then they are sent to what's called the special treatment unit, and that's for sex offenders. That's where they get supposedly rehabilitated as far as sex offending relapse prevention. So with that, they've learned interventions, like what to do. They have a support system that's in place before they're discharged from the special treatment unit. They're supposed to check in weekly and then eventually monthly, and they will have a parole officer who they need to check in with if they're going to be going home to their families. The families are much a part of their discharge planning process, where the family would have to have certain policies and procedures set up within their homes. If they're not going to their family, then they're going to be released to a residential environment. So now they're already discharged. They're either at home or they're in a residential environment. They want to come to your church. Unless the parole officer informs the pastor or somebody there that they're coming, you're not going to know who they are. And the whole congregation should not know who they are, because they have a right to that privacy and confidentiality. But you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. So wait a minute. Now I want to interject, because at this point I'm going to have to like pause at every step of the way, because there's a lot of information. This is different from TV, y'all. This is different. This is real life. So yes, and I'm going to think just TV for a minute. There is SVU, Special Victims Unit, right, where we see on television. And so someone who has offended a person is a victim, and that due process is taking place on, I have to choose my words very carefully, in the beginning of the situation. Let me just say the situation. Then there is identification, and there's the penal system, which takes effect
Years.
once it goes into the penal system.
Mm-hmm.
The victim, of course, okay, let me just say right now, for the record, here there is no TMI. There's only FYI. I'm going to say that again. There is no TMI. There's FYI. The digital couch was designed so that we can engage in critical conversations that need to be spoken about for all to hear. And within this spiritual and religious platform, we have to do what we can, not only to just reach out and embrace and take in the people who are hurting, but the people who have been hurt, and they're, according to the law, the letter of the law, there's supposed to be space for both of them. Okay? Correct. So, and please, again, drop comments and questions. I can see them on a number of devices. So when I think of someone who has offended, I think, okay, you've in essence been locked up, you're in the penal system, and I don't really think about the person coming out. I don't. But when you said the person might go home, in our pre-chat, we said, but if that person offended someone that was within their own home,
mm-hmm.
And then it hit me on another level. If they offended someone that was in their own home, and you said they may not go home, in my head, I was thinking, you mean there's a possibility they would be going home if they offended someone in their own home?
Yeah, no, that's the reason why they wouldn't go home.
Right. But just because you said it again, it unlocked and like opened all these other questions that I had to say, okay, wait.
Mm-hmm.
How many families have had to make that difficult decision to entertain the possibility of someone who has offended to come back into their home. Now, that's going to stir up a whole lot of pots. So I'm just trying to say, let's take it one step at a time. So if they do not go home, they go to another place. Now, this is what I was brought up knowing, that when someone has offended and they come back into their community, that there is public record. Because I know over the past 15, 20, maybe 25 years, it was just like, hey, every once in a while, look on the record, because there might be, or there is somebody who has been released back into this community, neighborhood, and they quote unquote have offended. And so everyone is like now on their P's and Q's, and they're watching, okay, who's this person? Where are they living? And unfortunately, that person has been harassed on their block and their building or what have you. And it's been very, very difficult. So, but then it sort of died down. I didn't hear much about it. So now tell me, there are facilities where people who are in this category, they would go to live?
Okay. And I want to clear up that not every person who has sexually offended their information won't be publicized if they go back to the community. It depends on the tier.
So who gets noted, whose offense gets noted, and whose name gets posted and whose doesn't?
The tier 3 person, the one who has done violent or non-violent sexual crimes involving children or adults, additional offenses by a tier 2 offender, forced sexual acts on victims or constraints, unconscious or substance impaired victims, underage, mentally impaired, physically disabled, non-consenting, or planning, attempting to commit offenses mentioned in another part, must register with Sexual Offender Registry for life and quarterly. So, and if the schools will know about them, like you said, the neighbor will know about them, but only certain ones. Like not everybody has to, depending on the tier, and it's 3 tiers. That's the one that has to be publicized.
Wow. Okay. I am just going to pop up a question or call out a question, and it is, can you provide the church with a standard operating procedure, an SOP, for dealing with this target population, and how should a church prepare? So we're definitely going to focus on that. So we have the person that has been reintroduced to their home community, and we've already just sort of addressed, like, they may go back into their own home depending on the situation, or they may not. They may go into a facility that may be like a transitioning residence. So now that they're back in their neighborhood, some people are just going to live life the way they want to live it. But then there are some people who want spiritual restoration. And that's what we're here to focus on. So they want to come to the church. They want to sit in the pews. What does that look like?
Okay. And it doesn't matter whether this is their family church or not. This is just, they want to come to anybody's church, right? Is that where we are?
I guess we should start with the whosoever will.
Okay, that's right. And all are welcome. And that's how it should be. Okay, so my suggestion is that the congregation should have policies and procedures in place already, that's included in your constitution. So it's not like, oh, what do we do if or when? But we should already be prepared. It's like, you're having a dinner party. You don't wait till your company comes to set the table. The table should already be set. That's always my motto. So with that, we have a risk management team that's incorporated in this. Sorry.
Question. So, and I just have another question. Does this affect only male sexual offenders? And we had a conversation that the offender could be male or female.
Or it could be a youth. It doesn't have to be an adult. This could be a child. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It could be anybody. Anybody is suspect. Okay. Yes. And I told you, I dealt with the juveniles first, male and female.
Okay.
So a risk management team is responsible for knowing who that person is. Let's say the parole officer has contacted the pastor or maybe a deacon or whatever, it's a church leader. So they know that so-and-so is coming because they've just been discharged. They want to be a part of the house of faith. Okay. So therefore, you know who this person is. But there are times when people will come and you don't know, and they don't want you to know who they are. But again, the rest of the congregation, let's say this person we know about. So there's a risk management team that's already been designed, set up in place. They know what their duties are. Small group, it doesn't have to be a large group. We'll call him George, has come. The rest of the congregation has no idea of who he is and where he's been, but the risk management team does. They will have a person assigned specifically for George who pretty much walks throughout the congregation with George. All right, maybe more than just George. I mean, more than one person, should that other person not be there. But this risk management team has set up what's called a limited access agreement with George and the pastor. They've all sat down. The George knows if he's offended children, he cannot be a part of the
youth ministry
or anything that would have to do with the youth.
All right, hold on a second. To those in my stream team, you know what I'm going to ask you to do. I need you to take notes. Number one, there's a conversation with the facility or the transitioning team to the house of faith. Number two, there's a conversation with the person who has offended, and there's a risk management team or there's a policy or SOP that's in the Constitution. I need to go and look at my Constitution because I actually never saw anything about that.
And 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be there.
Please, everybody ask for your church's Constitution. Please drop that in the chat. We need to take notes on this, that everybody look at their church's Constitution. And if it's not there, it needs to be there. Whoever's going to the annual church meetings, bring that up. Okay, go ahead.
The risk management team is responsible for that person for as long as they're in service and as long as they're attending the congregation. And they need to know when they're coming so that there will be somebody, a part of the risk management team, who's going to be there. That person is, again, under careful grace. And I just want to spell out what careful grace is. I wrote it down. Careful grace is where we extend those who have sexually offended a type of kindness that includes accountability with monitored and limited access to its congregational community. So limited access. They're not just free to roam. They just can't come when they want to. They can't join every auxiliary or fellowship that they want. It has to be approved of, has to be discussed, and carefully monitored.
Okay. Oh, I think that's a lot. So if the person is being watched, monitored, assisted like a buddy.
Yes.
To an extent, depending on what type of a ministry what type of a church you're in or how large your facility is. I'm not being silly on purpose, but there's a meme that goes, they're not going to know. They're going to know. They're not going to know. They're going to know. They're not going to know. They're going to know. Somebody's going to peep that. Somebody's going to see that, or somebody's going to notice that there's someone who is now butting up with someone who doesn't normally have a partner. You understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So I'm just envisioning like what that could look like depending on the ministry, depending on the church, and what have you. Now, there are some churches where, depending on where they're located or the mission of that church, their doors are more receiving to people who are transitioning like that. Oh, wonderful. I'm going to pull that up in a second. And then there are some churches that they may say, well, maybe that feeling or that type of a person is not welcome. So I'm just thinking of, no matter what type of ministry you're a part of, you should consider if someone comes in. Now, when you and I had this first conversation, I said, okay, I'm thinking of in my house of worship, that would be, of course, the deacon board, right? Or the official board, or somebody
Right.
on the official board, someone on the deacon board, somebody at the door. The ushers need to know. Somebody on the usher board need to know. Somebody on the greeters team needs to know, because when they see that person at the door, and actually, again, I'm not trying to be funny, but I can see this almost being like Secret Service, right? So we have the person standing at the door. I'm just saying, I'm really trying to envision this. This is the struggle that I've been going through over this week in terms of envisioning what this looks like. So depending on, again, what your ministry looks like, what your ministry, the policy, the mission and the vision of your community, of your church community, again, there may be more opportunities to welcome and to make a sacred space for folks. So we've talked about, now let me actually put this really, really beautiful comment up. Thank you so much. Let me show this comment. So this is from Sister Lenita Williams from Grace Baptist Church. She said, most churches that I know develop child protection policies, but based on this conversation, we need a risk management policy.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You're right. So now a number of ministries who are ministering to the community. It's not just ministering to one age group, but you're ministering
That's
to
right.
a family. And so there are
That's
always going to be children somehow, some way. And so thankfully, and I'm in New York, so we have Child Protective Services. We have what's called the SCR, the State Central Registry, where if anybody is going to work with, let's say, old-fashioned, like the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the summer camp, the BTU, even some layers of Sunday school or children's church, your name needs to go through the SCR. It's not just about, oh, hey, I want to join and work with the children's choir, and you can sing and what have you, and that's it. No, you have a conversation with the leadership. There's that vetting process, but this is very, very key. It almost just opens up that maybe more people should go through SCR just to be on the safe side.
And we have to remember that sometimes you have adults who have disabilities, where they're going to be required special attention as well. Not just where we're protecting our children. I forget the phrase that I wanted to use for that, but adults who have special disabilities who need somebody to watch them as well as children are being watched.
Right.
So that's a whole nother area.
So I wanna share a comment that has come up on one of our platforms, and it is, so we definitely have a person who wants to be in contact with you to discuss what you do, how you do this, to speak to other pastors for a clergy council. So those of you who are on this call, who are on this broadcast, who are interested in at least just continuing the conversation, we've already set up the conduit at this moment. Me, Doria Larrier, not specifically like Carey Wise, but Doria Larrier has agreed to be this conduit for this conversation. Because of the work that she does, it is very, very delicate, and she has to make sure that she also keeps her, what's the best word? I'm gonna say the word, but there's no connection. Her exposure in social media to a minimum.
Right. Correct.
Okay, thank you. So we will do that. And let me just say that there's another comment. So we want to make sure that we provide a balanced perspective that is free of implicit bias. So although across the board, that's one thing. Another comment is, please share a little about the rules varying in each state. Churches need to check the guidelines in their own state. The person who has offended has a special condition or a special connection, probably I'm supposed to say, with their PO, and the PO is the probation officer, correct?
Or parole officer.
Sorry,
Yeah,
parole
probation
officer.
would be the youth, parole or the adults. Yeah.
Right. But then again, when you said that there could be youth who are in this same
Yes.
category, I was like, wow, it's so, there are a few times that I'm at a loss for words. This is one of them. The church needs to know what they are, what those guidelines for their state are before they design. I guess the conversation is design an SOP, a standard operating procedure, or before they update their church's constitution. And then the last statement is the special conditions are the guidelines given by the judge. Thank you so much to Dr. Clifton. Thank you for being my stream team. So please, if you want to add anything else that we should be concerned about.
Well, as far as when they're released from sexually offending, that rehabilitation piece of it, they're going to be given a discharge plan that's going to actually spell out where they can go, where they can't go, what their obligations are as far as who they're supposed to meet up with and whatnot. So that's going to help, because even when they're assigned to a residential environment, or that director of that facility must have their discharge plan and go over it with them so they know what they're supposed to be doing as well. So we would probably be privy to that same discharge planning, so they know, well, okay, so you've offended children. Well, we know for sure, you can't do that. Okay, so you've been involved with substance abuse. Okay, so we're going to be able to see their profile pretty much when they're coming in, and that's going to be part of the limited access and the limited access agreement, where it's going to spell out what they can do and what they can't do. And again, each state is different as far as other things, but that's the gist of it. And it's one that you're going to build on your own based on your state and kind of what you want to work with. You and I talked about when children or adults who have special needs go to the restroom, they need to be escorted.
Right. And as soon as you said that, as soon as we talked about that, I said, wow. So no longer am I going to think I see a child that's walking off to, the bathroom. I know they're going to the bathroom, that they should just go unattended.
No.
So everyone beware. Take your own children, or if you see, let's say, a newcomer to your church and they're sending their children, kindly, ushers, beware, ushers, be vigilant, and say, oh, well, parent, take them. Or that's probably just the best thing. Let's just start with that. That's the best thing.
Yes,
that's
I would recommend that.
Wow. So we do have some additional questions, and that's, how do churches talk about redemption and restoration when ministering to this target group? So in essence, we focused on, let's say, strengthening our walls and strengthening the doors and the SOPs. But now we need to sort of focus on, how do we smile, right? How do we stretch out our hand? How do we recognize that, yes, if sin is sin is sin, then this sin in the eyes of God, how different is it from, I'm just going to be very granular, from someone, let's say, taking a stapler from work, right? how do we work through that? How do we set up these conversations to say, if whatever the sin is, if the person is interested in restoration, like, how much time do you have to do, right? There's time that a person can spend in a penal facility, and then there's time that we say, oh no, you haven't done enough. Like, how do we get into those conversations to say, all right, you are one of us, let's all work through this together?
Well, I would start off with saying using wisdom, of course, and that's what setting your policies and procedures up and being prepared for the dinner party before the dinner party or the guests come. Then to remember that, as I mentioned earlier, I started out with juveniles, and now I see my guys that I work with on a daily as the bigger boys who have just grown up and are still stuck in perhaps that age, because a lot of times when you've done something, even with drugs, whatever the age is that you started off when, you've gotten stuck in that age bracket of whatever you started in. So they've got anger management issues. They've got low self-esteem. They've got family members who a lot of times don't want to have anything to do with them. So the first thing is to have to see them as human beings who have just taken the wrong street, who have had some things happen to them as well. The importance of loving your neighbor as you love yourself. Again, I go back to the word wisdom. The fact that we have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We haven't done that. And that we'll all be judged at the end of the day. We're all going to have to stand before God at the judgment seat for what we've done or what we haven't done. So none of us is perfect. Perhaps you haven't sexually offended, but you've done something that you're not proud of. So that's how we do this. And to realize that just like with those who have abused substances, they've abused this. And it's they have to keep that before them, just like those who have used substances where they're saying they're in recovery. So the same kind of, mentality of, okay, I know that when I drink that I'm liable, I'll probably sexually offend because then my inhibitions go. So all those kinds of things, we have to just remember that these are human beings as well. And if they have done their time, if they have been or discharged from, the place where they've done their rehabilitation as far as sex offending, then we need to respect that. We just need to respect it. And again, using wisdom, having our plan in place, and allowing them to be able to come into the service, because I have here reintegrative shaming theory suggests that if offenders are not sufficiently accepted back into communities post-conviction and are chronically vilified for their offenses, then recidivism becomes a likely occurrence.
So at this moment, I'm going to read a statement that definitely connects with that. So a trauma, and this is from Dr. Clifton. Thank you so much, Dr. Clifton. A trauma-informed theology coupled with trauma-informed ministry makes this ministry easier to navigate. He says, Dr. Pyles is correct. We need to see them as people first rather than predators.
That's
people
right.
First rather than predators.
That's right. That is right. And my thesis, because this was what I did my doctorate in, is it is immoral or sinful to prohibit recovering and or registered individuals who have sexually offended access to congregational membership. I
Wow.
believe that the faith-based community has a duty as followers of Christ to emerge as an accommodation where the gospel of grace and forgiveness is revealed in its excellence of solidarity, thus treating all people with dignity, value, and worth, with an understanding that no one is outside of redemption. There's your word, even those who have sexually offended.
Wow.
And sin is anything that distances us from God. It is that which distracts or discourages individuals from sensing or experiencing the love of God. Sin is anything that encroaches upon, impedes, or ignores another's inalienable rights and nature to not only be free, but also whole and live. So if we want to interrupt that between the person and God, then we're sinning. Who are we, right? And then we're judging, and we're not supposed to do that either.
And honestly, I think that was when we first decided to have this conversation. I definitely had to work through that. I had to work through, is one sin greater or less than another sin? That sin is anything, again, that distances you. And if that is the definition, and I'm even struggling still to sort of say it, then the person who has offended has the same right, has the same privilege
That's right.
to sit in a pew
That's right.
than I.
That's
And
right.
so it's taken me 6 days. I'm at a place where I can have this conversation without stomping off. So here's another comment, and that is hurt people, which we know this, hurt people, unless we
That's right.
interrupt the narrative and reorient the negative behaviors by helping the one who has offended manage their emotions. So now that brings to a slightly, not really different, but this risk management team has to have connections to people who
That's
are
right.
licensed
Yes.
counselors, licensed therapists.
That would be the preference.
Right. That's the preference. And if not, let's just say you have a small congregation and your congregation is not made up of a lot of people that have that background or skill or what have you, then maybe connecting and collaborating with other churches or ministries or therapeutic centers in your neighborhood or what have you,
That's right.
to tap in, to say, because I mean, I know we specifically had a conversation. I spoke to you about this in our pre-chat, where not a member of this particular community, but a member of a community that had, just some emotional things that they were working through. And when the person walked into our church, people sort of looked at me and they said, Doriel, go see how to go. And I was like, what am I doing? And
Mm-hmm.
I tried to assist, and I was able to assist and support. But literally, I hopped on the telephone with a college mate that I hadn't really spoken to in 20 years, but I know that this was her work. And within about 7 minutes, she was able to say, Doriel, this is what you do. This is what you ask the person. This is how you pay attention to what they say, what they do, where they're going to walk, what restroom they're going to use. So those who are listening, you put two and two together. And so I quickly had to say, okay, here are the resources that I have available at this moment. Let me be their buddy. But then I also had to do one of these numbers. Now, y'all put the two and two together. I'm standing at the door and I just had to say, And people are like, Dora, why are you doing that? And I'm just like, and then they sort of figured out, just roll with me, and let's work this out. But it was very interesting that we had not had a conversation about that. And now, the conversation is more widely held. Um, but if the church can make a plan for
That's right.
like homelessness, right? If the church can make a plan for other vulnerable populations, if the church can, and especially if you're in, like, let's say a high crime area, so if
Mm-hmm.
the church can couple and have conversations with their local precinct, or their local hospital, depending on what the crisis is.
Right.
Through the AIDS epidemic, we coupled with hospitals and, uh, uh, medical care centers, to say what kind of resources. So now, and those of you who are paying attention to the news, there's going to be a release, or the penal system is releasing some of its constituents. Help me, please, I'm struggling. Some of its constituents, because of a variety of different situations. And so those persons are being released back into the community. And the community over the past couple of years has started to say, wow, how can we respond? How can we support? What
That's
can we
right.
do? So this is a conversation that needs to be on everybody's, let's say, annual church meeting if you're in ministry. And if it is beyond your scope, and if it is beyond the scope of your church leader or of the church leadership, of course, seek support, seek resources. If you don't have someone that's a licensed person in your staff or in your church community, ask for someone to make a phone call. If not, for a checklist, which I'm going to drop the checklist in the chat once we end this call, that I would love for anybody and everybody to take the link and then to share it out with those people, and almost like sending out the domestic violence telephone number, that 1-800 number. Just share it. Just share it. You don't know who's gonna pick it up, but just share it. Somebody's gonna see it and say, "Ooh, that's interesting." And that's what we need to do. One more comment, that returning citizens are coming home, yes, because of overcrowding
That's right.
and
That's right.
COVID protocols.
That's right.
And so if the doors are opening and people are coming home, or they're coming into transitional residences,
Mm-hmm.
yes, more people are going to be in the stores. More people are going to be, in the grocery store, whatever. More people are going to be walking past schools, which is why, as a younger person, I said, oh, if there's a person coming back home, that they are supposed to be within, I don't know what, the 5 blocks, 8 blocks of a school, that they could not be within that border. Now that may not necessarily be so, because we may not know who they are. And so I'm very glad that you informed us that there are those who have to declare or have to identify. I didn't know about that tiered system.
Right.
And then there are those who don't. And so, yes, if we are already sitting together, I don't want it to be an us versus them. If we are all sitting together, then generic protocols should be established that are on the books, so that nobody can say, oh, how come you didn't know? And how come no one said? And this person might be exposed to my child, female or male.
That's right.
Female or male.
Young or older.
Young or older. And how do we respond? It's not about kicking that person out, but it's about strengthening the people that we have that is a part of our clergy and our lay ministries, in order to support that person and to
It's
put that
about careful
on the path.
grace. That's the key word. Careful grace.
Careful grace. I'm just in a place of being moved. I really am.
Careful grace. Yes.
Does anyone else from our community, from our YouTube, our Facebook community, if you have any other questions or comments, definitely yes. And we will be putting up a list of resources that really outline this. Thank you so much to Dr. Clifton, who actually shared a document prior to this conversation that literally is like a tip sheet on the protocols, the policies, the SOPs, the resources that are literally right outside of your church walls that need to
Mm.
be into your church walls that really is a great summation of this conversation. So probably this will be the last comment, is that when we hold church services, in correctional facilities, and we create relationships, how will you respond when they are released and show up at your church?
Good one.
Use a fast word from the street. Don't start none,
It won't
won't
be
be
nothing.
none. Very, very interesting, right? All churches need an SOP in place to provide careful grace. I actually thought about this with people who are experiencing homelessness. Some people will have food pantries, right? And to do what? To give food to people who need. But then when the people who are experiencing lack of basic necessities walk into our doors, there are people who do want these.
Uh-huh. They're taken aback by
Like, why are you here?
their presence. Exactly. Yes.
I gave you some food. I don't know if I can deal with your smell. Should you really be sitting on our cushy seats, benches? How about sitting on the metal chair that can be wiped off? I'm just saying. I'm just saying. So, and someone said, agreed with me, right? So, if you reach out to communities of a particular demographic, do you really have the space? Do you have the sensitivity? Do you have the spirit of a welcoming heart to
Correct.
invite them in and to restore them and to bring healing to them, along with everybody else who may have, powder on and makeup on and their edges laid and their cute shoes on?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting perception. Yes, a safe, sacred space must be accessible to all. That is a good final word. Reverend Dr. Valerie Pyles, she will definitely be, I have her contact number. I will vet the people who are interested in communicating on this level. And I know that there's other work that you do that is connected to this, because you said that you started out working with young people, and then as they grew up, and now you say that they are your big boys.
My big boys.
Initially, when I heard you say big boys, I was like, wow, are they stuck in that term, boy? But when you said at the time that the offense occurs, emotionally, that they are still
Stuck.
in that, they're stuck.
They're stuck.
So we have a number of adult males who are still emotionally in maybe a teenage or a young adult frame of mind.
Correct. And we want to say female. I don't work with the
Yes.
females, but there's
Okay.
another facility that houses just females. So yes.
Just that light switch being turned on right there gives me perspective that I can look at people who I see in the street, in the store, in day-to-day activity, and we may look at them and say, why don't you grow up? Why are you acting like a child? How come, like, be a woman, be a man, take care of your responsibilities, or whatever it is. But if they're emotionally stuck, it's not something that you can just say, grow up
Grow up. Right.
and do what quote unquote adults are supposed to do. So I want to thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us, sharing the wisdom that you have, the protocols that we should take a look at being in place, the people who should be a part of these conversations, the steps that members of our church community should be in the know about, and should help to guide the people on the outside that we need to be in conversation about. If they are identified, if they disclose, and that journey into our doors, and hopefully we can over time develop ministries, not just to get them in, but to keep them there,
That's right.
if that is our goal. We definitely pray for you and for your ministry. Do you have any final words? I'm not seeing any additional questions from our audience, but if you have additional questions, please, you can drop them in, whether you're watching this live or on the replay when this broadcast ends, and I will definitely relay them to Dr. Pyles, and she'll be able, or will be able to convey information back to you. Dr. Pyles, a final word.
Just to remind everyone the importance of loving your neighbor
Hmm.
as yourself. And those who have sexually offended are, yes, our neighbors. Sacred, safe space.
Just to extend that a little more, they are our family.
They're our family. That's right.
They are our family. They're our cousins, whether or not we want to admit it. They're our uncles. They're our aunts. You know, there are some grandmas. Reports are coming out on many different broadcast channels of very interesting situations of women and men who have participated in this act. They should not be cast out. They should not be thrown away. We should not close the door, but somehow, some way, we should open the door, welcome them in, and assist them in their restoration according to our resources. Reverend Dr. Valerie D. Pyles, we thank you so much. This has been another episode of the Lott, Carey Women in Service Everywhere Digital Couch. We look forward to seeing everyone back here in 4 weeks on the first Thursday of April, which would be episode 14. Please set your notifications. If you want to share more of this information with other people, please do so. Welcome them in. And again, if you have other comments or questions about this particular conversation, please drop them in the chat and we will be able to relay them to Dr. Pyles and prayerfully get some resources back to you. I do have a resource that, again, is a great summative one-sheeter for based on this conversation. I think it's from Brotherhood Mutual website, and I will drop that on all the platforms that we are on. I'll drop the link so that you can refer to that document for your ministry. Peace and blessings. This is the Lott, Carey Wise Digital Couch, and we thank you. We look forward to seeing you on the next conversation. And please remember, this is not only just Thursdays in Black. And so we stand against gender-based violence and the eradication of it. But we are in our 31-31-31, our drive. This is our Women's History Month. And so we invite 31 women for 31 days, or 31 people for 31 days to pray for 31 days, and to donate, if you can, a series or a denomination of $31, $310, what have you. But we look forward to just supporting the Lott Carey Baptist Farm Mission Convention. We do a lot of great work by coming alongside. And in this situation right here, what are we trying to do? To come alongside those people who are hurting, those people who need restoration, those people who need healing, and stand with them in the final day. Because if I remember correctly, it doesn't matter when you confess Christ, if you were 2 years old or 2 minutes before you cross over. As long as you do it with a good heart and the right heart and a redemptive heart, you'll be on the other side. We look forward to increasing that number. Peace and blessings. Have a great, great night.